Well, hello, everybody. We are back with our next edition of Victims of Crime. We're adding in some more faces and changing up the players here. So we've got Ryan from Ryan and Brian Undertaking the Podcast. Without the Brian, it's kind of weird only having the one of you.
It is. It caught you off guard, didn't it?
It's kind of like a team, and you broke up the team for tonight. But just like happens in the funeral business, Brian had work. He got called in and had to do some stuff at work. But we have back John Hill with us. He was in our, what was her name? Catherine?
Catherine Peterson.
Peterson episode, the staircase, that he chatted with us on that one, which was from his hometown. So welcome back. And today we are diving into another one. People keep sending me these scenarios and these true crimes, which I love because then I get to dive in and learn some more. And this is one that has been big over the years and has had a documentary done on it recently. So we are going to be talking about the questionable hanging death of Rebecca Zahau, is I think how you pronounce it. As soon as we started the video, I was like, oh no, I never looked up how to pronounce her last name. So this was a big case. So in July of 2011, 32-year-old Rebecca was found hanging by a makeshift noose from the second floor of her millionaire boyfriend's California mansion. And this was shortly after her son had fallen down some stairs and had actually died. And so a lot of people said this was a guilt thing. This was kind of, her remorse, depression, sadness over that situation, but not for sure. I don't know what that beep was.
That was my email. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So what we do here is I'm going to tell a little about this story, and then we're going to talk about different parts of it as it comes from the embalmer standpoint, but also just into the true crime part, which I love. So she was gagged. She had her hands and her feet bound. The noose around her neck also had a cloth wrapping on the outside, which was knotted and tied around it. You can find crime scene photos all over the internet. I never post these in these videos. I've sent them to the guys that they can look at just to kind of get visual on what I have been researching and looking at, except for how to say her last name. And the rope had been attached to a bed across the room, gone out over the balcony, and then she had been found by her boyfriend's brother. And that's kind of where it was at. And she was naked. She'd been hanging there a little while, not like days, but she'd been hanging there a little while. So have you guys seen anything that is this extensive when it has come to hanging or a suicide of this nature?
Not myself. The suicides that I've seen by hanging has not been of this extent. We have seen one that was, more of a sensual nature, but nothing of this grotesque.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, it's just completely different, I think, from a standpoint of what, when someone, decides or goes through that, and goes through with that act of suicide, I don't know that they're thinking about being bound. And I notice on here, like, I've never been a part of something that possibly could be a crime. It's always just been a suicide. It hasn't been anything questionable besides that. This, when you go through the pictures, like, I guess that's what kind of caught me off guard, is it's very well planned, well thought out. I mean, just looking at how this was done is very well thought out. But being bound the way she was is very odd to me. Her hands and her feet both are bound in these pictures. And that's a big red flag to me. So I've never been a part of something like that. Now, as John said, suicide, we've obviously treated those people and treated those families as well. But I've never had one that has been, this questionable, because that's just odd to me. Being bound is odd to me, I guess, because I don't think of someone that wants to take their own life as tying their legs and their hands up. You know, if they're going to do it, they do it. I mean, we see it, guys. I mean, that's, you know, so if that decision's been made, it's been done. That's odd. I think that's very off-put, which, like I said, I've never been a part of something that would be a crime. So.
Well, I think that's why they questioned if it was suicide or if it was homicide, and they looked into it, and you can find all these reenactments where people physically themselves bound themselves, wrapped themselves to see if they could do what she did, if it was even plausible that it was anything but a homicide. And they found, yes, everything really points back to her doing it to herself. And it is interesting, some of the premeditated suicides that I have seen where it's like, yep, you got it done, because people that shoot themselves multiple times in the head because the first one doesn't work, or, you know, some of these things where people are just determined. And that's the only reason I could see maybe she was doing that, is in case she wanted to back out at any moment. But I feel like once you jump off the edge of that thing, why wouldn't that just work on its own? So it's hard to know the mental state. But what were you going to say, John?
Exactly what you just said. I mean, I don't know how anybody would think things through to where, okay, I'm going to bind myself. And then as I'm binding myself, and it looks like her hands were behind her back, you know, scooting over to the rail, trying to hop over, as Ryan just said, not just the oddness, but the awkwardness of trying to successfully, you know, kill yourself, all of that. It's just it's very, very different for sure. And I'm curious to know the statistics of how many suicides have been happening, with people saying, yeah, it's possible that you can bind yourself, but really how many has happened where you've really seen. And I'd love to know the statistics of that, of how many actual ruling suicides where they bound themselves like this.
I mean, we see where people are killing themselves in closets, where all you have to really do is probably put down your feet. I mean,
Exactly.
I think like Robin Williams, and was it Anthony Bourdain, I think, was a closet as well, where, I mean, you look at a closets are not tall enough where you could really physically, and a lot of them hang from even the top of the closet and be far enough up, I think. So it's determination of an act that you want to complete. Yes.
You know what else is interesting about that, though, is the bed too. The way the rope is tied to the bed and how far it's tied. The bed didn't move at all. That doesn't look like it's a heavy bed that if someone was hanging from it. I mean, it's sitting on carpet. You know what I mean? The bed's sitting on carpet. So that's kind of odd to me. I'm not sure about the table and the broken leg. I don't know exactly if someone maybe just set that up upright.
I'm not sure where that table came into play. I didn't watch the whole documentary on it. I need to, kind of like the stairway one. It was, you know, it goes too slow for me. I want like quicker information.
John, here, let me ask you this. Look at the noose, the picture of the noose around her neck. That doesn't look like a very tight noose.
Looks like a slip knot or something.
Yeah.
Too. And who knows, man? But obviously, you know, it's not I don't think it was ruled a suicide in the end, correct?
The last information that I saw was that it was ruled a suicide. The family did sue the boyfriend's brother for something, and you know, kind of went after him, but it was found, last I saw, it was found a suicide. But
I mean, the only way I could see, like Ryan said, it doesn't look that tight, it looks loose. I mean, if she did bind herself up, you know, she would have, I mean, I can't imagine her trying to put the noose over her head with her hands behind her back. So, you know, she would probably put that over her head, and then but it just seems a little too far-fetched.
Let me see this. So it was found in a civil court that gentleman was responsible for her death. So that they did find that he was responsible. But not, it's weird. He's responsible, but they're not really calling it a homicide. I don't know. It's so weird. It's such an odd case because I don't know. And maybe, I don't know.
It'd
Maybe,
be interesting to see the litigation
yeah, I need to look into
as to
that
what his story is
side
too.
of it. So let's talk about, I mean, if someone is hanging, whether it is suicide or a homicide, what are some of the things that we're going to be factoring in terms of visual and viewability that you guys have seen?
John, you want me to chime in real quick? Or?
Yeah, go ahead, buddy.
Man, I'll tell you what, we've all dealt with these cases, and none of them are easy ever, whether it's an adult or a young person. But you always have to worry about the neck, especially depending on how the person's done it. You have to worry about the neck. I assume we're talking about hanging here, so that's the kind of the route that I'm going. You're going to have discoloration, in certain areas, fingertips, probably in the face, maybe some swelling, eyes bulging in certain areas. There's going to be some distortion, and that's something that I think we have to worry about a lot. Depending on how long that person's been there, we're going to be dealing with things of maybe some decomposition, possibly. But it definitely creates, I'll say this, some distribution issues, depending on how long someone's been hanging. That can create a lot of challenges, and also some just disformations within the internal aspect of the cavity at times. Sometimes a person's neck can stretch a little bit as well, and that can be a challenge to get that person looking 100% back to that natural form. But I think we're going to be dealing with a lot of different things here, because you're going to have distortion in that face, swelling of the tongue. That's something that you're going to see. So like I said, it all depends on how that person does, in a sense, dies by suicide, how they do it. But hanging, I think, can create a lot of problems, especially to get that, so a person's face back to that normal, acceptable look.
Yeah. What are your first thoughts, John?
This past year has been interesting in that we've done hanging cases in the past, but this past year we've done up to 10 cases that I was thinking on them through. And I don't know what it was this past summer. I don't know if it was just in North Carolina, but it was just a lot. And a lot of the things that Ryan was just talking about hit the nails on the head. But at the same time, everyone was almost different. You had some that, the face was discolored. Then you had some, the face was perfectly fine. You had some where the distal areas were mainly discolored because of hypostasis and the blood pooling. It's not pooling in the back like it normally is because the person's laying down on their back or on their face. They're hanging. So everything is being pulled all the way down to the feet. And then, so the distribution issues, a lot of times, all of the blood, it seems to be pulling down in one area. And so, and then the neck area, of course, you have the abrasion marks from where the rope or where the hanging was done. And you've got to find a way to, cosmetically cover that. Sometimes with the neck stretching, the skin can fold over to where it's not even noticeable at all. There's just a lot of different factors. So basically, Ryan just hit a lot of the key points there, and it just varies with the type of injection as well. All of the cases that we didn't have to do a restricted cervical case, even though we were ready to do that. There was no swelling of the head when we did the injections or anything like that. But at the same time, we had to watch all of those other factors that Ryan definitely talked about.
Talk about restricted cervical. Can you explain what that is in case somebody has no clue?
Restricted cervical injection is basically embalming the head separately from the rest of the body, especially on cases where the body's full of edema, there's extra fluid, especially on cases where the body has been dead for a little while. There's going to be distribution issues. And when you go to inject your artery and inject the arterial fluid, that there's not a lot of good distribution, that there's not a lot of good drainage, there can be some swelling. And the last thing you want to do is to have the head larger, the neck larger, the face larger, and distorted even more. And so what you do is you inject with the right carotid artery, your main injection. but then you also raise up the left carotid. And what you do there is you make an incision in your artery and you literally clamp off the artery on one end, and then you put a cannula up on the other end, because even though you're cutting off the flow of the injection that's going down in your right artery and it comes up, you're actually still getting some fluid through your vertebral arteries in your back. And so, but it's not as much. So that type of injection is very, very important, to where the head will not be swelled and the head will keep its right proportion for when you do the injection superior in the face, then it'll be of right proportions and of right distribution and diffusion there, especially making sure that the body's thoroughly embalmed, but yet the face is also thoroughly embalmed without extra swelling involved.
That's a lot of these situations where people pose questions like, like my one series, can they be embalmed? It's such a range of what somebody may look like. Like this could be somebody hanging themselves and them being found right away, or they could live for a couple days on life support, or Brian's going to pop in here, or they could have been hanging in the woods for a week and have animal predation or all sorts of things. So it's kind of one of those, hey, Brian, it's kind of one of those things that there's so many variables that we could be talking about that it's hard to know. So welcome, Brian, to
What's up, buddy?
Hey, we are right in the midst of talking about the case, the hanging, suicide, homicide, whatever it may be for Rebecca. I've sent some pictures over to you if you want to pull those up too.
Yeah. Kari, let me comment real quick on that restricted cervical. Just from a broad spectrum, I've always thought of it as just protecting the head, and because there may be those times, John, and you said it, you're going to embalm the body at a stronger solution or a stronger index than you're going to embalm that head. I've always looked at it like I've learned some things, from you tonight about the vertebral arteries and things like that I wasn't aware of. I just have always been told, it's to protect the head.
Exactly.
So for me, my mix can be different, whether it's the body to the head. So it just depends on what you're dealing with.
Absolutely. I think it should be, especially if there's not getting good distribution and diffusion and good drainage, because as you all know, if you do too strong of a mixture, especially in the face, you're going to get that embalmer's gray the next day. And I'm always very careful doing an autopsy or whatever when I do the injection, and making sure that the face really doesn't need, in my opinion, too strong of a index and too strong of a solution, because it'll get the job done because of how close your carotids are into the face and things like that. And it depends on the case, obviously, with the edema and things like that. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
Well, one thing that, and no, go ahead. I love it. One thing that they talked about in Rebecca's autopsy report is a big thing that we're going to find with any kind of a air restriction, and that's petechial hemorrhaging, where you get it around your eyes, your face, inside the mouth. And so that's a huge cosmetic where it's kind of stained in. Brian, talk to us about petechial hemorrhage. Welcome, and talk to us about petechial hemorrhage.
Hey, all. So sorry I'm late. I just rushed in from the funeral home, but I'm so happy to see that John is in overalls. But I will talk about this. Petechial hemorrhages can, absolutely be troubling. It's not necessarily something that you're going to get out with arterial injection. You can hope for it, you can pray for it, and you can try for it, but it's not necessarily something that you can say, yes, I can do this every time. So then you've got to start thinking outside the box, and not necessarily outside the box. You go back to your mental toolkit of what can you do outside of just cosmetics, because cosmetics to me as a mortician, as an embalmer, I don't want them unless they're needed. So we're going to be thinking about topical packs, maybe hypodermically injection to decrease that color change. But the problem those petechial hemorrhages give us is they're little dots. They're little dots. So it actually does come into a cosmetic difference there, or maybe a cosmetic application of, instead of, painting like a base color on to cover everything, you can actually go in and do what Ryan and I've learned from interviewing some of these Hollywood cosmetic artists. You can do a splatter pattern, and if you can splatter different colors in different ways, you're not necessarily painting, but you're reducing the kind of the just the appearance of those hemorrhages.
No, that's great. I mean, that's the same with like the neck. It's really going to be hard to cover that discoloration and the pitting and things depending what they used. Yes, we can just get a turtleneck, bring a high collared shirt, and then we don't have to worry about it so much in terms of viewability. But when it's on right, when it's around the eyes, and the eyes have that petechial around and things, like you said, though, some of that bleaching effect that we can do. I know, John, you're a big fan of Hexy.
Huge.
Yeah,
Huge.
Good. Yeah, it does a really good job, bleaching out and just doing a wonderful job to where it, brings the color back to where it needs to. Absolutely.
Should have told you to have a bottle of that, so you could have done a quick commercial in there if you wanted to.
Prep room is right around the corner.
Another thing in her autopsy, which was kind of surprising, because I think often we see that people who are completing suicide may often have a mixture of drugs, alcohol, courage enhancers sometimes in their system. And she had a clean system. She had absolutely nothing at the time, which kind of surprised me because of the extent, that she went to for this. But that's another thing that we often have to look at, is that they may have a lot of things in their system that we're also counteracting with the embalming. So who wants to talk about kind of drug interactions and things? Ooh, Brian.
Hey, since I just got here, I might as well talk a little bit.
There you go.
One of the things we've learned and talked with educators like Dominic Astorino and many others within funeral service is that they talk about what we do is called a cellular wash. So we do this as embalmers in our injection method. So we're using chemicals to remove those, medications or chemicals, substances, whatever is going to be retained in the body. A lot of times we could call this nitrogen. I always fumble this word. Nitrogen waste. But if we can
nitrogenous.
Nope, you're going to do it too. John, can you say the word?
I just know it as nitrogen. There you
go. That stuff. If we can remove that stuff from outside the cellular wall, the vascular system, if we can push that through and then introduce a preservative chemical, a cosmetic dye, we're going to have much better results in the end. That's my bet.
Right pH level, the correct pH level. That's what it's all about, for sure.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. They hit that on the head.
Except we're all going to practice saying nitrogenous waste.
There you go.
Nitrogenous.
Let's say it together. Nitrogenous.
At least we didn't make up. I feel like in the last video we were making up some words that were not accurate at all. But
was that me or Ballard?
Oh, who knows? We might have all at that point. Who knows? That might have been in a beer video. I don't remember. I'm trying to think what words we were making up.
Because I blame Ryan for everything.
Well, you should probably. It's probably about it.
I'm the master.
I think we did this at some point. So I think sometimes cosmetically, when I first was reading this case, it talked about how she had that extra cloth wrapped around her neck. And I was picturing that it was under the rope, almost a vanity thing, which we sometimes see, especially with women that take their lives, that they do think about kind of the vanity of it, but it wasn't. It was on the outside, almost like an extra, okay, just in case I get through my bound hands and my bound this, I want to get out of the noose, I can't, because then I have to get through an extra. So the first thought was the vanity, which I've seen. Do you guys, have you any thoughts on, or have you seen that where there's a vanity side of the suicide?
I can hit this on the head. As a medic, I saw it numerous times, where people, when the act happens, you'll see women that won't necessarily do anything to their face. They'll shoot themselves in the chest. I saw that a lot. It's interesting, I think, as to that concept. But you're right. I think the vanity aspect of it, it does happen. That's the only one I can really think of, because that's what stood out to me. Was I couldn't understand, because that's excruciating, I'm sure. So I can't imagine sitting there and dealing with that. But yeah, I thought the choice was interesting, but it makes sense now that you're saying from the vanity aspect of things.
Any other thoughts about, or things that you guys have seen when it's come to hanging or homicidal hanging, that you've encountered? I think we all know at the end of the day, like, our first part is that we're preserving, and then we kind of attack the visual, and even though Brian's anti-cosmetics, but I think we all don't want to paint somebody up if we don't have to, but as long as they're well preserved, that's kind of the secondary to me, is we want to treat, especially like she had a little skin slip, it said in her autopsy report, and if they're outside, they may have exposure things, and some of that, if they've been there for a while before the family found them or whoever found them, there's just a lot of factors on that side. But what are there any other last thoughts on this?
I think it'd be an interesting case. Like I said, I've never been involved with one that would be questionable, I guess. So I think it'd be interesting. I think as a funeral director, going through that process and some of those, the media and all that. I mean, John, you talked about it when we did the Peterson case, how crazy it was, and that funeral home just being bombarded all the time. I think that comes into play here as well. But, it's hard for me to comment too much, because I've just never been a part of a case that would have that type of, those types of questions. So,
yeah.
And the only thing I can add here, guys, is just when we see these deaths by suicide and hanging specifically, that when someone is in so much pain that it's hard for most of us to imagine that they'll find a way. It doesn't need to be rope. They're so I've seen multiple different types of mechanisms for hanging, and they're all sad. And that's what I wish they had somebody to call, is I guess where my mind went right now.
Yeah.
They just want the pain to stop. That's what it's about. And
trying to put the fire out.
Exactly. And they're not even necessarily thinking about anyone to call. They want to think about the pain stopping and whatever is ailing them to get them to that extreme. And they honestly think that there's no other way out but that. And you're talking about various ways. We've seen the ones from just the rope. We saw a belt this past year. We did see a bed sheet, all these type of things. And it's just amazing what the mind goes through into that extreme. And like you just said, Brian, they'll find a way and they'll get it done.
Yeah. The only other thing when it comes to hanging, Kari, is that oftentimes hanging can be confused with autoerotic asphyxiation, which is probably a completely different show. So we won't go any further into that, but that it can be very accidental depending on the circumstances.
Right. When John was saying he's had a lot of hanging deaths this last year, and I have at the funeral homes I've been at as well. It's like you hear suicide, I'm like, is it a hanging again? Yep, it is. It's been interesting that it has been such a popular method this last year. It goes through I think spurts in different ways, but it definitely has been predominant in the last year, which is odd that you say that as well. So
I think it's been predominantly more seen, I guess, within the younger community.
For sure.
Within high school, within, some of this stuff. I've had some of that, and it's not fun. It's not. There's nothing there's nothing, I would rather do any other funeral than something like that, but yeah, we're seeing it, I think, in a younger generation rather than the older generation. So,
Yeah.
And you guys know this too, is that when you do a funeral, like you just said, Ryan, the elephant's in the room when everybody's coming to the visitation and everybody's coming to the viewing, where their eyes look at if the casket's open.
and their neck immediately.
And that's why it's so very important, what we do as embalmers, as Brian was just talking about, and Kari, doing what we can to make them, not just viewable, but also acceptable and all that. And Brian, I'm a big no cosmetic guy as well, for sure. So, and I mentioned this already, but, that abrasion mark, it depends on what they use. And several of the cases we had, because their neck did stretch, we were able to not have to use a scarf or a turtleneck. Just the skin was able to, the way that their neck is leaning up, was able to hide a lot of that abrasion and that discoloration. So, there's ways that we can make it happen and get a better closure for the family.
Yeah. And Kari, I don't mean to jump on anybody's toes here, but since I rolled in here kind of by the seat of my pants here, I kind of feel it's important that we really mention on this, being that the topic being suicide today, that we just encourage people to make that phone call. I don't care who you call, someone until they answer, whether it's 911 or your neighbor or anybody, make that phone call, because life is important. Your life is important. And a lot of us get that fire. We understand that fire that you just want to just put out, and it sucks. So, if you're thinking that nobody else feels like this, you will be completely surprised. I just released an episode on without Ryan. Excuse me, not COVID, but I released an episode on Undertaking the Podcast on 301, and my intention was to tell everyone, hey guys, I'm behind. I'm really, really behind. Just wait on me. I'll get to your emails and all your phone calls and texts and all that. I need some time. Just completely overwhelmed. And the amount of feedback I've had from funeral directors across this country, and frankly out of this country, has been mind-blowing about, we all feel the same way. And I'm going, my gosh, there's some underlying stress here that is just not being talked about. So when you feel alone, strangely enough, there's a ton of people that know exactly how you feel.
Yeah. You're never isolated the way you think you are, but it's hard to see sometimes outside your dark bubble, I think. So, well, and your family is so much part of whatever that choice is, that I know it's hard to think about that. And people say it's such a selfish choice. And you're not really thinking about that in the moment, but in the after effect, your family has to kind of work through. Like you said, the family's there and they're watching people look at them. And I have had a family who, during arrangements, some of the people in arrangements didn't even know the person died by suicide. It was going to be our secret. And so we couldn't talk about it. And they died suddenly. And so some of the immediate family never even knew, because the spouse didn't want everybody to know. It's odd. I think it's sometimes a shameful thing, or, embarrassing, or whatever it is for the family. And so it's however they need to handle it, because, there's a lot of guilt there for the survivors of someone who takes their life, and a lot to go through with that. I can't imagine. That's just horrible all around. So, but good interjection there, Brian. Thank you. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. Make sure to leave your comments on the case, what you think about it. Did you think it was suicide? Did you think homicide? What other case does this bring up in your mind? I know there's several other cases that are like this. There was another one I was reading about a woman who had tied with shoelaces to a mailbox, and they ruled it a suicide. A lot of odd stuff out there. So dive in, crime junkie people, you true crime lovers, and find out what else you can do. Brian, check out Undertaking the Podcast on any podcast episode. And thanks again to John Hill for joining us for this one. See you guys on the next one. Bye.